Yeah, I found out I was HIV positive in 1993, actually not thinking that I needed to worry about it. But when I went with some friends who were gay men and had been popular. So I was worried about them, and I took them in to get tested, and one of them freaked out when he saw the needle, because in 93, that was how you did an HIV test, was you had a blood draw. It was a small amount of blood, but it was a blood draw, and so he saw the needle, and he's like, oh my God, I can't do this, the needle, it's this big, and they take a gallon of blood. And I went in with my bossy self, because that's the way I am, and just kind of was going to straighten him out, and decided instead that I would lead by an example, and I would take an HIV test. And actually, even before I found out I was HIV positive, that was my first time to understand the stigma associated with HIV, and especially women in HIV, because they didn't want to give me an HIV test. I was so low risk that they weren't going to be reimbursed for the test, and they felt that there was no need to bother testing me. I hadn't really been sexually active with a lot of partners, but it was definitely more than 4. And so I offered to pay for my own test, and came back 2 weeks later after all of my friends had also tested. And we were prepared to set up a care structure for our friends, because we had 6 gay men who were tested. In 1993, chances were really good at least one was going to be positive. And I still remember the feeling of celebration, because one after the other came out and was HIV negative, and we thought, wow, we've dodged the bullet. And then I went in to get my test, and it was the same guy who hadn't really felt that I needed a test, and we sat down and we did the test results, and he said, oh, good news, you're negative. And I thought, oh, okay, well, that's not surprising. And then they went into the post-test questions that were, how do you feel about that? Which I still feel are the dumbest questions on the planet, because I mean, like, what? Duh, I feel great about being HIV negative. And I was thinking, how much longer do I have to put up with this fool? And I'm reading along upside down, and I realized that the box that's marked is not the HIV negative box, but the HIV positive box. So this person had made a bunch of assumptions, and they had seen me, a white, well-spoken woman, graduated from college, employed, working, dragging friends in to get tested. And he had looked at the folder and had seen the result that he expected, which is that I was going to be HIV negative. And of course, the guy freaked out and started hyperventilating. That was very exciting. And feeling really bad about giving me my test result in such a crummy way, which he should have. But like many women, I jumped into the caretaker model. And I said, don't worry, I'll be fine. I'm a really strong person. And I left, and I had to tell my 6 HIV negative gay friends that we were so worried about, that the person who hadn't escaped the bullet was me, and that I was the HIV positive person. My initial reaction to finding out I was HIV positive was an incredible mix of high coping skills and falling apart. I had visited the doctor right after I left the testing clinic, because I'm a take charge kind of gal. And they did labs, and they said, well, probably because you've been infected for 2 years, you're gonna already be pretty sick. And it turned out that was fairly true. I needed to go on meds quickly. I didn't have the luxury of waiting and making some peace with being HIV positive before I went on meds. So I had a lot of information, and I went home and tried to be a strong person all by myself, which was really not a wise thing to do. For people who are newly testing positive, I want to say find your friends, hold on to your family. If you have a significant other or somebody special in your life, hang on to them, because that's how you need to deal with this. Not alone. It's not anything that you need to deal with alone. And in my case, I just went and I hid in my apartment and broke down and thought that life was over. And then I got mad. Then I got really mad, which was good, because that was very healthy. And in my mad process, what I did when I was storming around my apartment looking for things to break, which I found quite a few, I found a pair of Timberland shoes, and I had just bought them the weekend before. They had a 10-year warranty, and the reading that I did said that people who were HIV positive usually died within about 10 years. And I looked at these shoes and I thought, These shoes are going to be alive longer than I am. So, I was an executive chef at the time. I had very sharp knives. And so I got out my knives and I cut up my shoes and I had a screaming fit. And it actually was really wonderful to get all of that negative energy out, because while the shoes didn't survive, I obviously did. And I think that night was the start of my path to really fight this like it's a battle. And that's the way I've lived with it for 20 years. Sharing an HIV diagnosis with friends and family can be really challenging. You truly learn who your good friends are and who your family is that's going to be able to support you through this journey. My family's from Boulder. They're very weird. So my dad is a control freak and owns stock now in all the drug companies because he didn't feel that they were researching HIV medications, in particular on women, fast enough. And so now he has voting stock in many of the companies and encourages them to include women in the trials. That's my dad. My mother is a Boulder woo-woo kind of gal, and she consulted an astrologer. And the astrologer said, and remember this is 1993, and so the astrologer said, well, she just has to live to 2010 and there'll be a cure, which actually ironically was pretty close to right for the one person in Berlin. But however, to make it to 2010, according to the astrologer, what I was supposed to do was strip nude every full moon, go out in my backyard, bathe myself in the light of the full moon and the cleansing rays. And that was going to help me make it to 2010, complete with the drama. And I'm thinking, I live in downtown Boulder. I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to scare my neighbors horribly. And I really don't think I need the world to see that much of me. So I've done it once, just in case, to hedge my bets. And otherwise, I have really tried to do everything my doctors say and that I've researched and found out. My sister's a little bit harder because we moved around a lot when I was in the military, when my dad was in the military when I was little. And many people remember where they grew up and where they went to high school or even where they went to junior high. I don't actually even remember where I went to kindergarten. I have to kind of think back and count on my fingers. But the one constant of my childhood is my sister. And of course she saw some awful, frightful video early on about how people are going to die and they die quickly and it's awful and painful. So for her, my living with HIV, on one hand, she's really proud of me and what I do. And on the other hand, she's very afraid of losing me because she says, and in a way it's actually quite true, when I die, her childhood leaves with me because there'll be nobody else who remembers it. And that's hard. That's hard. Friends has been different, and it continues to be an ongoing battle because I grew up in Boulder and I went to Fairview High School. And I was so excited to move back to Boulder in '93 because I had about 20 friends from high school that still lived in Boulder, and we used to travel in this huge pack and we would have so much fun. It was kind of, even when I was 30, it felt like I was still back in high school, and yeah, bad behavior ensued. However, as I started to share with my friends why I moved back to Boulder from being an executive chef in Madison and being a clothes buyer in Boston and all these great things, they never thought I'd come back to Boulder. And truthfully, I came back to Boulder actually because I was worried about getting sick, not having the support of my mom and dad. And I've been very open about my status since 1994. I've actually been on the Speakers Bureau at BCAP. However, as I told friends, what I realized was that they didn't have the information, so I educated those. After a while, being the fountain of HIV education and information for your friends, when they're ignorant and they're not making any effort, gets to be really tiresome. In 1994, we also had a lot of people who were dying. It was very different. People call those the bad days. And I think that's a euphemism. Those were the dying days. Those were the days where I would come in and I would do my RC shift. And I would flinch when there was a candle because we light candles to remember people who died. And I would wonder, who's that next friend of mine who's died, or who is maybe somebody I haven't even met yet, who I'm no longer going to be able to meet. And that was what was going on. And so I was planning my memorial service, and I was putting long-term, long-range health care in place, and I was talking about going on medication. And according to my friends who were having children and changing jobs and divorcing their first husband because they were having another affair with their second husband, my life was really not anything that they could understand. Many times they were compassionate about my life, but kind of when people, and I wouldn't constantly talk about it either, but when I would say I can't have lunch at 1 o'clock because I'm taking empty stomach meds, and I need to take those at 1 o'clock, and they wouldn't understand, or they would say, oh, you're so high maintenance. I would think that they didn't understand and weren't supporting me. So I look at those 20 friends. I just had my 30th high school reunion. I'll date myself a little bit, because trust me, when you're HIV positive, every year's a victory. Yeah, I am in passing acquaintance with 2 of them, and not very close with any of the rest, because they weren't willing to support me in what I was doing. So I have a very interesting story about friends from high school, and this was actually not somebody I was even really close to, but I went to some pre-reunion parties, and this guy came up to me and started talking to me, and I knew that he knew about my status because I've been pretty open about it. And he started talking to me, and all of a sudden he reached out and smacked me in the forehead. And I thought, okay, I definitely don't know you well enough for physical assault on my body. And I'm like, what are you doing? Turns out he's joined a religious group, a Christian group that sadly believes that HIV is demonic. And he was trying to exorcise the HIV from my body by smiting my brow with his holy hand, which I thought, I'm going to smite your holy something with my hand. But when we talk about people judging us and stigma and friends that we know, oftentimes judgment's really subtle, and other times it's really not subtle. But for my story, I know many people who have other stories, and I want to be clear, I'm not against Christian churches, any of that kind of stuff, but when people judge HIV and HIV positive people, it's just not acceptable. I consider myself blessed as an HIV positive woman, which confuses people sometimes. I actually was married before I found out that I was HIV positive. So I have never had to go out and try and figure out how to date as an HIV positive person. That is something that I can't even begin to fathom. And I have a number of friends that have to negotiate that tricky course, and I have such empathy for them. It's not easy being married and finding out that you're HIV positive, and my husband and I really thought that it was going to be the death of our relationship. But we were smart, because we, again, did the research. That'll be a common theme here. Looked up how one can have protected sex, safer sex, because no sex is entirely safe, safer sex, and how we could have intimacy in our relationship, and how we could get support for me being HIV positive and him being HIV negative and him staying HIV negative. And I have to tell you that people ask me why I do so well with HIV and why I have so much fight and so much energy, and it's because I have my husband who supports me, and he believes in me he's a physicist, so it'll kill him. He believes in me 110%, because that's not possible if you're a physicist. But, he does. He believes in me and he supports me. And even when I stigmatize myself and I judge myself and I get down on being positive, he doesn't let me stay there. Other relationships, yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard to meet new people and to meet people in social environments, especially when they ask me what I do. My husband and I go to a lot of his business things, and we're there and we're talking, and of course it's America, so everybody always says, well, what do you do? Because that's that's the validity check, right? Like, can I talk to you? Do we have something in common? And it's very hard, because I used to try and come up with something cute, like I'm retired early, or some excuse kind of thing, and I'm a stay-at-home mom, but we don't have any kids, or whatever. And I finally realized that was stigmatizing, that I was stigmatizing myself. And so now I introduce myself as exactly what I am, and I say I'm an HIV positive activist, an educator. Now, if they don't know what to do with that, that's their fault. But I have seen people start off in one place, and we're talking and we're talking and we're having a great time, and all of a sudden as I start talking about my activism work and the Positive Women's Network and BCAP and all these organizations that I love, and they're sort of sidling away. And it's like, mother, may I take 3 gigantic steps away from the diseased pariah. And it's like, that makes it hard to meet new people because you start developing a shell. And so constantly I have to remind myself that it's their problem, it's not mine. Really what I wish I knew about HIV is that it's really important to maintain healthy relationships, to set boundaries. Just because you're HIV positive and you really want to keep people in your life, it doesn't work to allow people to impose on you or to take advantage of you, because that's not healthy. But that's life advice. That's not so much about HIV. What I really wish that I'd known about HIV was that women can get infected as well. We talk a lot about high-risk categories. We know in the United States that women of color are high-risk categories. But when I talk to people about being at risk for HIV, and this is what I wish the message had been back in 1986 when we had the test and we started talking about prevention programs, was that if you come in contact with somebody else's blood, semen, vaginal fluids, or breast milk, and it is introduced into your body via oral sex, anal sex, vaginal sex, sex in your ear, any other creative things you can think of, doesn't really matter, that you are at risk for getting infected with HIV. Because when we talk about categories, when we talk about, oh, it's them, then so many other people like me feel that we don't have to worry about HIV. Because I knew about HIV. I knew it happened to gay men and Haitians and injection drug users, none of which I am. I didn't know that HIV was something that would be really part of my life as well. When we talk about women and we talk about prevention, we need to talk about really taking back our power around our sexuality. And so that talks about educating in high schools and things like that. And I think that that's really important. Because until we actually teach everyone, not just gay men, not just injection drug users, everyone how to be safe in the sexuality that they choose, then HIV will be out there and people will be at risk for HIV. For my own particular experience with what people have said to me, because I am a white woman, I have had people come up to me. I've had some people at HIV conferences come up to me and say, so, how'd you get it? Are you an injection drug user or are you a hoe? Okay, what to do with that? That's a bit challenging. And so even in our own community, it feels like you can put people into groups. And so instead what I say, and we haven't talked about it yet, and I'll go into it a little bit, is about how I got infected. Because I wasn't an injection drug user and I wasn't a hoe, and who cares even if I was. In my particular case, the way I got infected was that I trusted the wrong guy. And that's something that is, hard to talk to people about, because while it's more common than injection drug using and being a prostitute for most people when they're talking about sexuality, if they have to accept that somebody like me got infected, then they also have to accept that somebody like them can get infected. I think sometimes it's important to share the story of, I always think my story is important, share how I got infected with HIV, because it's not the common way that transmission is understood in the United States in particular. I grew up in Boulder and I moved to Boston, and I lived in Boston, and I had a great career. And I was a buyer for a women's clothing company, and I was jetting off to New York and doing all these really exciting things. What I neglected, because I was young and naive and superficial, I thought, I've got a great job, I'm making great money, life is great. What I neglected was any of the support, which is so interesting, because now support around being HIV positive and supporting others around whatever their life issues are is a mainstay of my life. Back then, young, dumb, not so important. So I lived in Boston for 2 years, and I actually didn't really make a lot of friends, and I didn't volunteer, and I didn't join a church, and I didn't do anything where I could have really given myself some support. But I thought, I'm making a lot of money. Why do I need friends? Until one day I hit a really tough patch. And I thought, okay, this is where you need friends. And I'm a control freak, so I was making a list about where I was going to go out and hunt down friends, right? And all of a sudden, I had this brainstorm, like, great, instead of a friend, I'm going to get myself a boyfriend. Because if I got a man, that would solve all my problems. I'd have the benefits. Enough said. So I started going out and looking for a man, which must have been really scary because I made it like a military campaign. It was like, we go here, we check it out, nothing there, go there, go there. Yeah, it was crazy. And I met a guy, imagine that. And he was awesome looking because on my checklist of the perfect boyfriend attributes, of course, again, control freak, he was tall, he was good looking, he graduated from Harvard, he didn't live with his parents, you know, had a job, very nice. What I was really missing in anything that I was looking for in even somebody to potentially date was, is he honest? Is he nice? Is he kind? Does he like animals? Does he recycle? We're Boulder, right? All of those really important things. And so I met him and I saw him and I thought, fabulous. And we dated for a while. And after a couple of months, we started talking about having sex. And I tried to have the talk with him, which, you know, you're supposed to have this talk about partners and it's supposed to be in a neutral environment when you're sober and all your clothes are on. And I thought, oh my God, I can't do this. But I'm 24, I can do this, I'm a grown up. And so I sat him down and we had the talk. And I said, so, you know, I've only had a few sexual partners. I've never been pregnant or had any sexually transmitted infections. And, you know, I'm really low risk and kind of, you know, pretty just boring when it comes to sexuality stuff. So what about you? And here's where it becomes a problem because he looked right at me, right in the eyes, and he said, yeah, I'm exactly like that. Well, I'm not pregnant because I'm a guy, but yeah, you know, I'm really low risk too. And so we agreed that I'd go on birth control pills and we didn't need to use condoms. And sadly, being young and naive and also being in a place where I really wanted somebody special in my life, I didn't ask more questions. I didn't negotiate condom use. I didn't even think that we needed to use condoms because we were just both low risk. And sadly, that's the one who infected me. So, for all the teenagers out there who think that if you don't have sex, you're gonna die, trust me, trust me, it is not the case. Because in my situation, what I had to wake up with every single day after I found out I was HIV positive was that I settled on a guy because I felt lonely and I wanted him to solve my problems. Brought me a few extra ones, thank you. And that we didn't use condoms. I didn't insist on protection because I wanted to keep him so badly. And trust me, 20 years later, with HIV that I got from him, he wasn't a great deal and I wish I'd let him go. I actually have faced a lot of stigma and discrimination around HIV, being HIV positive. But it's also part of what makes me as strong as I am, because if the worst you can imagine is that somebody's going to be mean to you, once somebody's mean to you, that loses power, really loses power, it loses its sting. When I found out I was HIV positive, I was an executive chef in a restaurant, and I used to have to explain who Julia Child was. Now I don't anymore. But I was the next Julia Child, and I was on television, and I was blowing things up and burning my hair and having a wonderful time. Regretfully, HIV is something that people don't want to have in the kitchen when somebody's cooking their food. 43% of the American population is afraid of eating food that somebody who's HIV positive cooks. So I was fired from that job because of other people's fear of me transmitting my HIV. And I'm like, well, as long as we're not in the back cooking dinner, meaning having unprotected sex, you're pretty okay. But there's that fear. And so when people start getting into a fear cycle, they start making bad decisions that put people like me in a place that we aren't able to do things that we love, like cook in a professional kitchen. The stigma and discrimination question is really a tough one because you can talk about it from the micro to the macro. I wanted to open my own restaurant. Because I'm HIV positive, I don't qualify for a life insurance policy. If you don't have a life insurance policy, people don't lend you money. I couldn't open a restaurant without a business loan. And so if you start unpacking all of these things that people take for granted in just their everyday life, it's amazing. I have a friend who wanted to have a child, and she started talking about wanting to get pregnant, and she's HIV positive, and she had doctors and other HIV positive people coming down saying, well, of course you're not going to have a child because you might pass that virus on to your kid. Yeah, maybe in 1993, 94, 95, 96, that was a problem. But now in 2012, we've dropped the transmission rate so low that it's negligible. That's the word I was looking for. We've dropped the transmission rate so low that it is absolutely negligible. It's so small, it is hard to even measure. But still, there's that assumption that she's going to have an HIV positive child and that she's selfish for wanting to have a child. Then we can talk about hiring practices. I mean, if you're HIV positive, oftentimes you can't work 40 hours sitting at a desk. We need more creative structures of a job environment. We need 20 hours. We need to job share with somebody. You know, Boulder, we come up with some pretty creative solutions for things. Actually, I think most people come up with creative solutions when they're hard pressed. But HIV positive people are so incredibly underemployed because of the fear and the judgment that goes along with it. And I also need to talk about self-stigmatization, because I'm very open about being HIV positive. And the reason why I am is that if I say HIV positive is something that I have, it's an illness, it's a virus I have, it is not who I am. It doesn't begin to define who I am. But if I'm afraid of telling people that I'm HIV positive, then I'm buying into the fact that being HIV positive is shaming and something I need to feel guilty about. And that's why I wish more people were open about their status, but I entirely understand because, like I said, I don't have a job that I need to worry about getting fired from. I don't have children